Good afternoon, my dear students. In today's lesson, we are going to talk about Charles Dickens. He was born in 1812 and 1870. Let's talk about Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens was born in Portsmouth on 7th of February 1812 into a middle-class family of civil servant. John Dickens was an open-hearted and a kind man. Charles spent his childhood in the atmosphere of love and friendship, although endured harder times later on. The happiest years were between 1817 and 1822, when John Dickens held a good post in the Casadem dockyard. It was an enchanted time for little Charles. When Dickens was 16, he went to London because his father secured the position of a clerk there. Very soon, Charles realized that his happy childhood had been left behind after his family moved to London in 1822. Dickens enjoyed a wide popularity during his lifetime than had any previous author. Much in his work could appeal to the simple and the sophisticated, to the poor and to the screen, and the technological developments as well as the qualities of his work enabled his fame to spread worldwide very quickly. His long career saw fluctuations in the reception and the sales of individual novels, but none of them was negligible or uncharacteristic of or disregarded, and though he is now admired for aspects and phases of his work that were given less weight by his contemporaries, his popularity has never ceased. The most abundantly comic of English authors, he was much more than a great entertainer. The range and compassion and the intelligence of his apprehension of his society and its shortcomings enriched his novels and made him both one of the great forces in 19th century literature and an influential spokesman of the conscience of his age. The family lived in poverty, and their household consisted of Mr. and Mrs. Dickens, their 5 children, a servant, and James Yarmouth, a relative by marriage, and Charles' schooling came to an end, and he had to contribute to the family funds. John Lermont found him a job in a warehouse for several shillings a week. In 1824, his family reached Bolton, and Charles, the eldest son, had been withdrawn from school and was now set to manual work in a factory, and his father went to prison for debt, and these shocks deeply affected Charles. Though abhorring this brief descent into the working class, he began to gain that sympathetic knowledge of its life and the provisions that informed his writings. Also images of the prison and of the lost, obsessed, or bewildered child recur in many novels. Much else in his character and art stemmed from his period, including as the 20th century novelist Angus Wilson has argued his later difficulty as man and author. In understanding women, this may be traced to his bitter resentment against his mother, who had, he felt, failed disastrously at this time to appreciate his sufferings. She had wanted him to stay at work, and when his father's release from prison and improvement in the family's fortunes made the boy's return to school possible. Happily, the father's will prevailed. His schooling interrupted and unimpressive ended at 15, and he became a clerk in a solicitor's office, then a shorthand reporter in the law courts, thus gaining a knowledge of the legal words often used in novels, and finally, like other members of his family, a parliamentary and a newspaper reporter. These years left him with a lasting affection for journalism and a contempt both for the war and for Parliament. His coming to manhood in the reformist 1830s, and particularly his working on the library Benjamin morning hearing, greatly affected his political outlook. Another influential event now was his rejection as suitor to Mary Bednall, because his family and the prospects were unsatisfactory. His hopes of gaining the changing at losing were championed his determination to succeed. Meanwhile, John Dickens was put into Marshalsea debtors' prison for his debts, and his family had to follow him into the prison because the debts were great and they had nobody in London to address for money. They had to stay in prison until Mr. Dickens could pay all his debts. After being released, John Dickens decided to take his son away from the Ray house, but his mother didn't want to lose the money his son was earning. Charles Dickens could never forgive her. When Dickens was 15, he became a lawyer's clerk. In 1822, having learned shorthand, he secured a full-time position in the Mirror of the Parliament. He wrote sketches and signed them both. It was his nickname. As a result, his first book, Sketches by Boz, was published in his 24th birthday. The next 2 years, Charles Dickens devoted to his famous Pickwick Papers and the publication which brought him fame and money. Illustrations to Pickwick Papers. For several years his life continued at this intensity, finding serialization and so America turning strenuously and receiving quasi roll of honors as a literary celebrity, but offending national sensibilities by protesting against the absence of copyright protection. A radical critic of British institutions, he had expected more from the Republic of my imagination, but he found more vulgarity and sharp practice to detest than soft arrangements to admire. His writing during these prolific years was remarkably various and, except for his plays, resourceful. Pickwick began at high spirited farce and contained many conventional comic parts and the traditional jokes. Like other early works, it was manifestly indebted to the contemporary theatre, the 18th century, English novels, and a few foreign classics, notably. But besides giving new life to old stereotypes, Pickwick displayed, if sometimes in embryo, many of the features that were to be blended in varying proportions throughout his fiction. Attacks, satirical or denunciatory on social evils and inadequate institutions. At 25, in 1837, Charles Dickens was already famous. It was a successful period of his life, and his first son was born, and his family moved out of lodging into a 12-room house. During the next 6 years of writing, Charles Dickens observed life in the decayed debtors, prisons, schools, and the workhouses. The conditions of Yorkshire boarding school were described in Nicholas Nickleby, and he lived at 48 Doughty Street from April 1839 to December 1837 to December 1839, and secured his reputation here. This house is still standing there. His self-assurance and artistic ambition ambitiousness appeared in Oliver Twist, where he rejected the temptation to repeat the successful Pickwick formula. Though containing much comedy still, Oliver Twist is more certainly centrally concerned with social and moral evil. It culminates in Bill Six murdering Nancy and the Fagins last night in the condemned cell at Newgate. Charles Dickens was a very thoughtful writer, and there was a very important element in his work, which is above all the others. It is the power of characterization. Most of the people in his stories are in a sense types. They are based on real-life people, and though he gave them an independent vitality. His visit to the USA in 1842 wasn't casual, and his purpose was to say for himself if the Republican experiment in the United States had brought a desirable freedom and equality for all the Americans. Dickens was struck with horror at meeting slavery there. Dickens' love of humanity and the inherent goodness of common man opposed to the egoism of the upper classes makes him a central figure in the literature of England in the 17th century. Charles Dickens undertook several trips in the 1864 and the 1869 to Australia, the USA and Ireland. Afterwards, he became ill and died on 9th June 1870, and he was buried in the Poets' Corner in the Westminster Abbey in London. And when he was 10, his family moved to London, where his father got into debtor's prison. After that, Charles left school to work in a factory. For 2 years he worked in a dirty room casting labels on bottles, and then he went to school for 3 more years. He had little formal education, but still succeeded in life. So, you can see from the photos the Charles Dickens and his family. Over his career, he wrote 50 novels, 5 novellas, hundreds of short stories, and non-fiction articles. He also worked for 20 years as an editor in a weekly journal. So Dickens' other merits include campaigns for children's rights, education, and other social reforms. He used to be young and a poor reporter at the time, and he immediately became a famous writer. Dickens published many other novels later, among them Oliver Twist, Dombey and the Son, David Copperfield, and many others. His books are rather interesting to read, and he mostly wrote about the hard life of poor people in Victorian England. Even though he lived more than 100 years ago, people still read his books with pleasure. So, in this video, at this presentation, you can see the titles of his works of the Charles Dickens: A Christmas Carol, illustrated by Lynch, and the Charles Dickens of A Tale of Two Cities. It's the short stories. He wrote dozens of hundreds of short stories. Hard Times, also the stories of the Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens died on June 9th in 1870, and he was buried in Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey. So, to create an artistic unity out of the wide range of moods and materials included in every novel, without often several complicated plots involving scores of characters, was made even more difficult by Dickens, writing and publishing them severally. In Martin Chuzzlewit, he tried to resist the temptation of the current monthly number and to keep a steady eye open the general purpose in the design. The Christmas Carol was suddenly received and written in a few weeks. So, my dear students, at home you must write down all these all these works, and so write down. Thank you very much for